Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Ginnie Graham Show. And I am here with, I think, the fifth stop on the Farewell David Blatt tour, the long goodbye, the long sad goodbye with David Blatt, our longtime friend. You're leaving for your home country of Canada. That's right? That's
That's
really
correct.
happening?
Yep. Going to be moving to Edmonton, Alberta in mid-August.
Well, we're sad to see you go. So that's why I want to talk to you one last time. For those of you who don't know, David has had a long time relationship with the Tulsa World, as a source of information, as an op-ed writer, member of our community advisory board, and a critic on occasion. So, fan and a critic is perfect. So, but I
Mostly a
wanted
fan.
to
Mostly a fan.
well, I can't say that you've been wrong on the times you criticized us, so we learn. For those of you who don't know, I kind of wanted to just give a summary of your LinkedIn, if you don't mind. So, you
Sure.
arrived in America as an immigrant in 1989 to get your doctorate degree in government from Cornell, right?
Correct.
And then you somehow end up in Oklahoma, where you get a job with the Senate, uh, analyzing healthcare for Oklahoma government, which you had no experience in healthcare policy or Oklahoma government, right?
Exactly. So I'd like to say that I was hired as the fiscal analyst for the Health Committee of the Oklahoma State Senate, despite the fact that I knew nothing about fiscal analysis, healthcare policy, or Oklahoma for that matter. But at the time, the newly appointed fiscal director of the Senate staff, Tom Walls, was himself a recovering academic. And he looked at my resume and thought to himself, well, looks like he might be smart enough to figure this out. So I got hired on at the legislature, and really everything sprang from there.
And you made it work. And I think you really made a difference was in your next steps. I think you were there for like 3 years, right? As a
So I
fiscal
spent three
analyst.
years. Actually, we had moved to Tulsa first for a year. Then, when I was hired at the Capitol, moved to Oklahoma City for 3 years when I was on staff, and then ended up back in Tulsa working as the director of public policy for the Community Action Project of Tulsa. Stephen Dow hired me to be the policy director.
Right. And that's where I met you. And you were working in like a closet at the Community Action Project. But through that work, and I think Stephen and the Community Action Project really amplified the
Yeah.
idea of data-driven analysis. That was something that I don't think Oklahoma had very much of at the time. It seemed like laws and policies were made on personal experiences, anecdotes. There was some data, but it wasn't quite what you brought. And this is where I think your impact really came through. You were there for about 8 years, and you went on to found and executive direct the Oklahoma Policy Institute, which took it even further. And I think really pushed other organizations in Oklahoma to do better at public policy. Um, and then after that, you went for a little bit, taught when I should have audited a class from you at the University of Oklahoma in the public administration program. And you then went and you were at Oklahoma Appleseed as director of research and strategic impact, and that's where you're leaving. So I kind of want to say one of the things that you had posted not long ago, which I thought was fascinating, was the legislature 30 years ago, very different from the legislature now. And you've worked with a lot of lawmakers in that time. So you had a top 25 best lawmakers you've worked with. I don't know if we have time to go through all 25, but can you give me like 5 to 10? What are the best lawmakers you've dealt with and why?
Yeah. So, I thought it was somewhat bold and foolish enough to try to identify 25 of my favorite. I did refrain from a similar list of 25 of my least favorite. But, if somebody wants to ply me with alcohol before I leave, I might be able to come up with that one as well. Um, so I did come up with 25, and I think just in broad terms, what was notable about that for me in coming up with the list is that there really was a bipartisan list. Um, when I was on legislative staff in the late 1990s, I was fortunate to work with really a stellar group of Democratic legislative leaders, particularly in the Senate, which is where I worked. And in hindsight, it feels like a golden age of legislators. But I think even at the time, we recognized that it was a stellar group of legislators, and we had a really great group working on fiscal staff. And I was going back over the list, and there were so many Democratic leaders who I worked with in the late 90s, who really did outstanding work and who I really feel very honored to be able to say that they all became, or many of them became, friends of mine over the years after I left Senate staff. So Stratton Taylor, who was the pro tem, Cal Hobson, who was the vice chair of appropriations, Angela Munson, who worked on healthcare, and who actually ended up joining OK Policy around the time that I left as their outreach director. Bernice Kane, who was a lion of the Senate in terms of healthcare policy. Ben Robinson, who was my subcommittee chair, who I worked with on a daily basis. Penny Williams, who made incredible contributions to education. All of those were long-standing legislators. They had all mostly been elected in the late 1980s, and they were the last generation before term limits kicked in. So pretty much all that group and several others were able to serve until 2004 because term limits were approved in 1990. They went into effect in 1992, and sitting legislators were given 12 years from that time. So most of the individuals who I just mentioned had until 2004. I think all of them ended up serving until 2004, but then they left. And really, since then, it's been much more of a revolving door. The legislative tenure has become much shorter. We have, every election you see much bigger rotation of people retiring. Most aren't even term limited now because everything has been accelerated. So we often see that somebody moves up into a leadership position as speaker, as pro tem, or as majority leader in their second or third term in the House or at the end of their first term in the Senate. So we see everything has been accelerated and much more turnover. But even with all the change, there have been great Republicans who I've worked with from the time when I was on staff and Republicans were in the minority, which in Oklahoma was not that long ago, really until the early 2000s in the House, until the late 2000s in the Senate. Republicans were in the minority before they very quickly took over and won a supermajority. But I think of people, two of the first Republican House speakers, Chris Venge and Chris Steele, were among the most decent, hardworking legislators of integrity that I saw, throughout my 25 years. More recently, there was a group elected in 2016. Mark Lawson, Carol Bush from Tulsa, Marcus McIntyre from Duncan, all of them did great work, and I had the opportunity to get to work with them and become close with them. So, I would say that throughout my time at the legislature, most of the legislators were hardworking. They would put their head down and wanted to do the work. We're not trying to get the spotlight. And I think that's a part of the process that many Oklahomans really don't get a full sense of because the legislators they hear from tend to be the ones who are shouting into their megaphones. And very often, the reason that legislators put out press releases every 3 hours and go on the news is because they don't necessarily have a lot of influence in the building. Sometimes it's folks like um, Brian Bingman, who was pro tem for several years when I was working at OK Policy, or Chris Benge. Um, they're doing the work. Appropriations chairs like Earl Sears and Roger Thompson. Um, they're doing the hard work, they're rolling up their sleeves. They don't need to put out a press release to say that they've just introduced a bill or, calling on the attorney general to sue the federal government. So there really is a difference between the ones who have the most influence in the building and the ones who sometimes become the names and the personalities that the average Oklahoman may be aware of and often tend to give legislative politics a bad name.
So who right now would you say actively in office you think are doing a good job trying to do the work of the people and not the work of themselves?
Yeah. So I described it in the piece that I submitted to you guys a few weeks ago. The legislature reminds me of a classroom where most of the students have their heads down at their desk and they're trying to get their work done. And there's some shift disturbers who are throwing erasers and jumping on desks and making a lot of noise. Now, I would say that the number of disruptive members, the ones who are really trying to burn it all down rather than do the work, has increased in recent years. It is a function of the times we live in. But for the most part, if you look at who are the leaders in the House side, Kyle Hilbert as the Speaker, Mark Lawson is the majority leader, the appropriations chair, Representative Caldwell. On the Senate side, Pro Tem Paxton. If you look at the appropriations leader, they tend to all be serious folks. And sometimes you see, even if they're not, if they come in ideological and partisan, just the responsibility of governing tends to moderate folks. So one of the best relationships I developed over the years was with Representative Leslie Osborne, who now serves with great esteem as labor commissioner. And, she will say that she came in full of the passion to, you know, get rid of all of the waste, fraud, and abuse and shrink government and cut taxes and give Oklahomans back more of their money, which all sounds fine until you look at where we spend our money. And $9 out of every 10 of state appropriations goes to 10 major agencies in the area of education, healthcare, transportation, and public safety. And there really isn't a whole lot of fat to cut when you're looking at common education, when you're looking at public health, Medicaid, mental health, transportation. So Representative Osborne is one that, she came in saying we just need to cut, cut, cut. And then because she came in with an open mind and listened to folks and did her work, over time, she became much more skeptical of that. And um, I think has evolved into a flaming moderate, somebody who really appreciates the important work that state government does, the fact that most people working in state government are sincere, hardworking civil servants of integrity. So, just being in office sometimes leads to a transformation where reality ends up taking hold.
So I've been in many rooms with you where we're talking about community priorities and challenges. You are always the one in the room bringing it back to poverty. Everything comes back to poverty, and it's such a broad term that affects everything: education, healthcare, jobs, employment, housing. But you're the one that's always like, it has to do with poverty. It has to do with poverty. So you've been here almost 30 years.
Yeah.
We don't seem to have improved. Like if you look at the metrics. But what is your take on it? Why can't Oklahoma get movement on this? What's our problem?
I mean, that's a great question because we've had so many serious efforts to study the problems. The Oklahoma Academy for State Goals has an annual town hall where they have looked at criminal justice issues, where they've looked at mental health issues, where they've looked at education, and have come up with great recommendations, many of which have made it into law. And we have made progress on criminal justice reform, thanks to Chris Steele, who I mentioned earlier, and many others. Um, we've seen great work on mental health, where agency leaders, nonprofits, philanthropy, Tulsa philanthropists have played a leading role, whether it's George Kaiser Family Foundation, Zarrow Foundation, Schusterman, others in Oklahoma City as well. You have some terrific foundations that have led the way and have really passed some sensible policies. We've expanded Medicaid initially just for children, and then more recently for adults. Um, we have expanded early childhood education. We have done home visitation programs. We have in a bunch of ways really done what research and best practice from other states tell us we should be doing. And I think maybe the best we can say is things haven't gotten worse in the way they should. Ultimately, where we haven't made the progress is that there are too many people in Oklahoma who struggle to earn enough to pay the bills, to stay afloat, much less get ahead. Too many people living paycheck to paycheck and not getting paycheck at all, who are really struggling with mental health issues, with housing issues, because of our over incarceration and decades of throwing so many people into prison that the men and women who come out of prison have criminal records, which serves as a real barrier to employment and housing and public benefits that may be necessary. Um, Health, our health status is always a disaster. Health insurance helps certainly, but we are near the bottom in all the chronic conditions. We don't eat well, we don't exercise enough. Um, we just we don't always have access to the right services at the right times. So I wish I had a great answer to this. It seems to be a mix of the way our economy is structured, longstanding cultural issues. There definitely is a distrust of government. We don't want um, government in our lives telling us what to do, and sometimes we resist getting the assistance that may be available that can help get people on their feet and moving forward. I don't have a great answer. But I've often said when I've looked at the income data that Oklahoma ranks somewhere in the mid 30s in terms of median income. We're in the same group of states as Oregon and Ohio, and led me to say that Oklahoma is not a poor state. We just play one on TV. So if you look at the income, we're not 48th, 49th, but we are 48th and 49th in so many indicators around education, um, healthcare in particular.
Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about your legacy, and I don't know whether I'm going to embarrass you or not, but I will say that for me, your legacy, as I mentioned earlier, has to do with the data you put forward. Because I know a lot of people will look at your work and they might disagree with your recommendations on any given topic, but no one's ever been able to take issue with the facts that you put forward on what's that's based. You have created data that basically strips out all that fungible stuff that people put in stats that make people not trust statistics. And through your time here, I think you've shown how public policy using data can work most effective. Um, kind of you can we have our anecdotal and our lived experience, and you're bringing, and that's great, but you're bringing that extra element to say, here's how you can use tax money to benefit the most people. And while that sounds easy to say, it's very hard to do. And you left that as a legacy. But I'm going to turn the question back on you. What do you hope the legacy is that as you leave Oklahoma?
So I appreciate the kind words, and certainly, um, if we were to boil down what we did at Oklahoma Policy Institute, to two words, it would be that facts matter. And, that's a harder argument to make now, but I think there's still value in it. I hope the legacy primarily is the organization that I helped found back in 2008, Oklahoma Policy Institute, that continues to operate and continues to have a strong, competent staff led by Shiloh Kantz, who I hired initially as an office manager, and then she grew to be our director of operations and development, and has really flourished as a policy wonk in her own right over the years. Um, I'm very hopeful and confident that OK Policy will continue on um, serving as one of our founding board members referred to OK Policy as the irrefutable conscience of Oklahoma. So we wanted the data to be irrefutable, but we also wanted it to tell a story and to be connected to values. And when you talked about the emphasis on poverty, we always wanted, we always looked at issues as how does this affect low-income Oklahomans? Um, our bread and butter issues were around budget and tax policy, where for the most part, most of those engaged in budget and tax policy are representing corporations, businesses, large companies. We were there trying to represent the low-income Oklahomans who may get the earned income tax credit and the standard deduction, but otherwise, may not see that they're affected by tax policy. But when you keep cutting the income tax and there's no money left for state services, these clients are being affected. So we always wanted to be in the arena, guided by some core values, but bringing irrefutable data to the work. And if I have any legacy, I hope that it's having created, established, grown a think tank that has outlived me by 6 years and counting, and I'm confident that it will continue to live on, being a solid, progressive, or left of center organization, but always rooted in credible data.
So the question I'm sure you've answered 100 times, if not more, is why are you leaving?
Um, so I have the opportunity to go because I have a Canadian passport,
Mhm.
was born there and lived in Canada till moving down to the States to go to graduate school. And um, I have found what has happened in the States, not just since January 2025, but really since 2015, 2016, to be very unsettling. Um, and, just looking at all the work that has we've done at OK Policy, before that at CAP, even at the Senate, now at Appleseed. Um, a lot of that is very much in doubt. Efforts to provide healthcare to low-income people, to provide food assistance. We worked a lot on immigration issues. All of that, it really feels like there's been a long time tug of war between the left and the right, and things move 3 inches one direction and four in the other and six in one, but it tends to, have been a competitive fight, and you win some and you lose some, and now it feels like the sands are shifting beneath us, and find where things are in the United States to be very concerning. Um, so a lot of people say that they would like to get away. We have the opportunity, and that's what we have decided to do.
Well, I hate losing your influence here. Will you be continuing to work in public policy where you go?
Not entirely sure, but I don't think I will be working on Oklahoma policy.
Well, I
It's been a
miss your
long,
election. In recent years, you've been able to really drill down with election analysis that you really didn't do as a fiscal analyst, but you've gotten very good at distilling down who won the presidential race in the city of Tulsa, distilling down the mayor's race. So hopefully we can continue that kind of work and influence.
I'll see how much I miss it. Maybe some, maybe a lot, or maybe none at all. I will say, as much as we are eager to escape to the relatively for now, depending on Trump's latest mood swings, up to Canada, we are going to greatly miss Tulsa and Oklahoma, which welcomed us, which, as I said, took a guy who really didn't know anything about the state and provided me tremendous opportunities to have a thriving career and raise a family, and feel very much at home for almost 3 decades. So we will greatly miss our friends and the community here. We still intend to come back and visit in Tulsa, but we are excited about the new adventure in Edmonton.
Well, I do wish you well. I'm excited for you. I know going back home it's still a homecoming for you. So, like with everything, I always give guests the last word, and this will be the last word with you, which makes me a little sad. But what wisdom do you leave with us today?
I don't know that I have wisdom, just a lot of gratitude to the Tulsa world for all the opportunities you provided. Always had fair and accurate coverage. When you said I've been a critic, mostly of the business model and financial side, more than on the reporting and editorial side. So I've appreciated that, and um, I was telling a friend this morning I will remain a subscriber until they just keep raising my rates. So
Well, like I say,
for now,
I have
these
the
will.
same issues with the app myself. So that
Yeah.
kind of thing. So yes, I
But
understand
thank
that.
you,
But
Ginny.
thank you. Thank you for your time here. Thank you for helping make Oklahoma better because even though the metrics are not great, you're right, they could be worse. And I think you've just kind of pushed the state in a good way. So thank you.
Thank you, Ginny.
All right.
Bye.